Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, a tribute to Roger Corman. We're back. So if you caught the last video I just put out, A Bucket of Blood, you'll know we're spending this month honoring the memory of Roger Corman. I've said before, but he was a very versatile director. He made lots of different kinds of movies, but in the 50s, he made a lot of monster movies, and they had very low budgets. So many of these monsters looked very silly, such as the one I mentioned in Creature from the Haunted Sea. Also in the past, I've reviewed The Wasp Woman. That's another classic stinker. But the difference between Roger Corman and Ed Wood was that Roger Corman was a lot more successful. He made monsters into a business before he branched out and did all kinds of stuff. So anyway, while I don't think this type of movie best represents him, you know this month we had to get at least one dumb, stupid monster in here, so I chose It Conquered the World from 1956. It involves a bunch of scientists at some government facility who are sending some satellite into space when our main character, Dr. Anderson, shows up telling them that it's a bad idea and to call it off. Why? Because aliens don't like that shit. But if the safety of Earth is his concern, he's actually the one who makes contact with the alien with his own homemade radio communicator, and that's where all the trouble starts. So the plot in a nutshell is, guy tries to save the world, but instead endangers the world. It's not clear how he understands the alien, which is from Venus, and it's kind of refreshing when it's from a planet other than Mars, which it seems to be most of the time. He thinks the alien's going to be peaceful, but really it just wants to conquer the world, as the title suggests. So when it comes down, it basically hides in Bronson Cave the whole time. This is one of those movies where you never see the monster until the last 10 minutes, so sit tight and watch people in suits and ties talking in living rooms. That is until the grand finale, and oh boy, is it gonna be a finale. We will talk about this monster, but since the movie saves it for the end, so will I. So the alien sends these flying blob-like creatures all over the place, and they look pretty absurd, but hey, you ain't seen nothing yet. What happens is these bats latch onto people, and then the alien somehow gains control of their minds. I mean, look, I'm trying my best to explain this. So now the people act differently and have no emotions, which brings up a very obvious similarity to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It has that same idea that without emotions, you can achieve peace and harmony, according to the aliens. It also has some similarities to The Day the Earth Stood Still because the alien stops all electricity. There's a montage where you see equipment shutting down all over the world. It directly mirrors the montage from The Day the Earth Stood Still. Eventually, the only people left who are not under the aliens' control are a small group: Dr. Anderson, his wife, his friend Dr. Nelson, and some army soldiers. But anyway, this is when the good stuff happens. His wife goes into the cave with Dr. Anderson's rifle. It is commendable that they have the leading lady confront the monster, because usually that doesn't happen in these kind of movies. So Corman was very progressive in that way. Anyway, this is when you get the first good look at the monster.
So that's what you look like. You're ugly.
You're one ugly motherfucker.
Okay, now there's a lot to talk about. First of all, just look at that fucking monster. Is that great or what? And second, you gotta love the dialogue. She gets all these great lines to shout at the monster.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
Oh boy. There's so much to unpack here. So, Beverly Garland, who played Mrs. Anderson, thought the monster looked ridiculous. Of course, who wouldn't? It was originally a lot shorter, and according to Roger Corman's book, How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime, he says, coming from a planet with a powerful field of gravity, the monster would sit closer to the ground. That's the way he figured it. Now, of course, the gravity on Venus is not stronger than Earth, but when Beverly saw this tiny, squat monster, she just laughed, stood over it with her hands on her hips, and said, "So you've come to conquer the world? Well, take that," and she kicked it. So what you see on screen is kind of accurate. Although, unfortunately for her character, she gets killed. The monster grabs her with its claws while she just stands there screaming, doing nothing. Next, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Nelson separately are fighting against all the military people who are under the aliens' control. Although, like I said, there's a group of soldiers who are not under the aliens' control, and go into the cave to fight it, though they meet the same fate. My favorite moment in this is when Dr. Anderson takes a blowtorch and lights one of the men on fire. Whenever you see an actor being lit on fire in one of these type of movies, you always think to yourself, man, this is low budget, so I hope that person didn't get hurt. Then we cut to the monster killing the soldiers, and it's unbelievable how useless these soldiers are. One of them points a bazooka at the creature, but he never fires it. He just waits for the creature to come close and kill him. And then it's Dr. Anderson with his little blowtorch who lays waste to the creature, burning it as it bleeds from his eyes, which was chocolate syrup, by the way. Though in the struggle, he's killed. And all this action takes place right outside Bronson Cave in Griffith Park, Los Angeles. And if you want to be real specific, it was in front of one of the east portals, the one on the right side, which was Owl Cave in Twin Peaks. It was in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy, Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, Robot Monster, Night of the Blood Beast, the original Captain Marvel, Return of Dracula, Lone Ranger 56, The Mighty Gorga, Tremors 4, and Unknown World. Now that was just the second east portal I was talking about. There's 3 portals at Bronson Cave, and if you counted all the movies that were filmed around there, it goes into the hundreds. So if you want to know all about Bronson Cave, well, check out my video, Thinking Fourth Dimensionally at Bronson Cave. It's a good one. So after the battle is all over, Dr. Nelson gives a final speech, and this speech is a whopper. It's like something Rod Serling would later do in The Twilight Zone, but this speech is so long and rambling, you don't know exactly what it's trying to say. Just listen.
Men have to find their own way to make their own mistakes. There can't be any gift of perfection from outside ourselves.
Well, damn. Now that we've reached the end, let's talk about the monster. What do you make of that thing? I love the expression. It's like a bad kid that knows it did something wrong. I've heard this creature described as a cucumber, a turnip, or an upside-down carrot, but really, it doesn't look like anything. I don't think anyone has ever figured it out. The creature was designed by Paul Blaisdell, and when you're talking 50s monsters, specifically the lower budget kind, he was the guy. He made the monsters from Beast with a Million Eyes, The She-Creature, Voodoo Woman, Not of This Earth, From Hell It Came, Invasion of the Saucermen, It, the Terror from Beyond Space, and more. And oftentimes, he was the one in the costume playing the monster. For It Conquered the World, he made the monster using a rubber skin over a wooden frame, flashlights to make the eyes glow, it had wheels to move about, and the pincers were supposed to move, but they broke the first day of shooting, so instead they just flop around. But let's get down to business and talk about the cast, because it can't be ignored that Dr. Anderson is played by Lee Van fucking Cleef, the badass bounty hunter Angel Eyes from one of my all-time favorite movies, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He was also in For a Few Dollars More, so yeah, he was in the second and third installments of Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy. But even back in the 50s, he was in a lot of films, many of them westerns, but not usually a starring role. So when you see him in It Conquered the World, it's kind of jarring because I just think, holy shit, it's Angel Eyes. He even has some of the same badass dialogue.
Am I still gonna have to kill you?
I was supposed to kill you.
When I'm paid. I always see the job through.
And when he's holding that blowtorch, he comes off just as intimidating. Especially when he's fighting the monster with it. If only it was shot spaghetti western style. In fact, just a year before, in 1955, Clint Eastwood made his film debut as a scientist in Revenge of the Creature. And that same year, he was in Tarantula as a jet squadron leader dropping bombs on the tarantula. Just think, Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef were both taking down monsters around the same time. Anyway, now that I got that out of my system, let's talk about the other actors. Corman regulars Jonathan Hayes and Dick Miller play soldiers. And then you also have Peter Graves as Dr. Nelson, the one who makes the final speech. He was probably most famous for the Mission Impossible TV series, but I know him best as Captain Over in Airplane.
Joey, have you ever been in a Turkish prison?
A fun fact, he happens to be the younger brother of actor James Arness from Gunsmoke, How the West Was Won, and he played the original The Thing. So it was like a big monster Western family tree. The title of It Conquered the World has always been in dispute because the monster doesn't really conquer much. I used to confuse it with The Monster That Challenged the World from '57. That one had a much more awesome looking monster, and the title is fair, implying that it tried to take over the world, but failed. Charles B. Griffith wrote the final script and only had 2 days for revisions. Story has it that the film was so bad he asked to be removed from the credits, although funny enough, he's actually in the movie playing one of the scientists. It Conquered the World was released as a double feature with The She-Creature. It was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and it was remade as Zontar, the Thing from Venus in 1967. So it does have a legacy of some kind.
Zontar, you're slimy, horrible.
You one ugly motherfucker.
So it does have a legacy of some kind. In conclusion, I'd say it's a bad movie. There's no way to sugarcoat it, but the final 10 minutes with the monster is amusing. It's a quintessential 50s cheesy Corman flick, but next up, we got something different.